People whose NDAs have expired. What secret can you finally reveal? Story 1. I worked for Equifax 20 years ago, and let me tell you, we did things with your data we absolutely shouldn't have. I know, huge shocker, right? Selling it, sharing it, spamming your inbox with nonsense. It was the Wild West. But the best part? The company acted like email was some brand new futuristic tech. One guy in a meeting literally asked, "Wait, we can send ads directly to their computers?" Like, yes, Gary, email has been around since the 70s. The future is now, old man. Anyway, long story short, if you ever wondered why your inbox got flooded with junk mail about sketchy sweepstakes, that might have been me. Sorry. Story 2. Back when I worked in screen printing, we had a huge military contract. Big patriotic orders, dog tags, plaques, badges, all made in the USA. Except they weren't. Everything came from China. Our job? Snip off those Made in China tags and sew in some good old Made in USA labels. It was like a full-time undercover mission in deception. I guess this explains why my grandma always swore her factory in the 50s played fast and loose with sizes. If they needed more mediums, they just swapped tags on smalls. If you've ever bought a pair of jeans in 3 different colors and only one fit? Yeah, now you know. Story 3. I used to work in Medicare sales. Let me just say, if your elderly loved one gets a Medicare call, hang up. I worked for a company that scammed old folks daily, tricking them into upgrades that were actually downgrades. Some had Alzheimer's and didn't even know they were getting kicked off their plans. I once spent 2 hours undoing a switch that would have made a guy's $20 medication cost thousands. I quit because I couldn't stomach it. But listen to me. The people on those calls are 20-somethings desperate for commissions, and your grandma is just a dollar sign to them. Protect her. Story 4. I worked in finance, and let me tell you, the system is more rigged than a carnival game. Your loan rates? They weren't decided by some complex algorithm. Nope. It was based on my mood that day. If I was hungry, you were getting a bad deal. If you complimented my shirt, boom, lower rate. I once gave someone the best terms possible just because they made me laugh. You think it's all data-driven? Nah, it's vibes-driven. So next time you're applying for a loan, bring snacks and be charming. It might just save you thousands. Story 5. At my old job, we had a life insurance benefit. Sounded great. $10K for your family if you passed. Except, it wasn't $10K, it was a lot more. The company just kept the extra. They'd take out a massive policy on employees, tell us it was a nice perk, and then when someone died, boom, free money for them. It's corporate grave robbing, and it's totally legal. So if your job graciously offers life insurance, check who the beneficiary actually is. You might just find out your employer is secretly hoping you take up skydiving. Story 6. I worked in the auto industry for a luxury brand, and let me tell you, those glowing customer reviews? Completely manufactured. We were trained to manipulate people into leaving positive feedback, no matter how bad their experience was. My personal favorite trick? If a customer was pissed off, I'd pull them aside, nod solemnly and say, "Look, I believe you, but if you leave a bad review, it's not going to hurt the company. It's just going to hurt the poor employee who was on your side the whole time." Worked like a charm. Oh, and those free oil changes you got? Yeah, that was just a sneaky way to fix acceleration issues without admitting to a recall. If you ever wondered why that car review site raved about a vehicle that turned out to be a lemon, well, now you know. Story 7. I worked in marketing, and let me tell you, those fancy job titles mean absolutely nothing. Companies would hire junior employees, slap on a title like Senior Brand Strategist, then turn around and charge clients absurd hourly rates while paying us scraps. The best part? The time estimates. If a project took us 4 hours, the client got billed for 8. The whole industry is basically just a legal scam with better PowerPoints. One time I saw a client get billed for a full day of strategic analysis that was literally just my coworker Googling stuff for half an hour before taking a 2-hour lunch. Every time I hear someone say, "Our marketing team is working hard," I just laugh. Story 8. I did data entry for a lifestyle seminar company, and I cannot stress this enough. If you've ever given your personal info to one of those self-improvement programs, some sleep-deprived college kid absolutely had access to it. Names, emails, home addresses, even credit card numbers. We handled all of it with the grace of an over-caffeinated raccoon. There was zero security. I once accidentally emailed an entire list of customer info to the wrong person. My supervisor just shrugged and said, "Hey, it happens." The only reason your identity wasn't stolen is because most of us were too lazy to do anything with the data. Story 9. I worked for a cannabis company, and if you think those expensive strains are carefully curated and tested, I have bad news for you. The reality? They just mix whatever they have and call it whatever sells. Upper management didn't care about quality, they cared about pushing product, stems, seeds, random batches thrown together. It was all fair game. I watched them slap premium labels on total garbage. If you ever bought a fancy strain and thought, this doesn't feel like what I ordered, you were probably right. They're not selling you a high, they're selling you a brand name. Story 10. I once worked for a company that audited medical bills, and let me tell you, the system is designed to screw you over. Our job was to find things hospitals forgot to bill for and make sure they collected. But if we found something you were overcharged for, oh well, no refunds. I saw people get hit with thousands in extra fees for procedures they didn't even have, and we were told to just move on. The best part? The more money we found, the bigger our bonuses. So next time you get a surprise hospital bill and wonder how it got so high, just know there was probably a guy like me behind a desk, making sure they milked you for every last dollar. Story 11. Reality TV is faker than a spray-tanned influencer's personality. I auditioned for a show a few years back, and before I even got through the first round, they handed me a script. Not a loose outline, an actual script. Say this. React like this. Pretend to fight this person. The producers weren't just nudging drama along. They were outright fabricating entire storylines. I met one contestant who was cast as the villain, even though she was the sweetest person ever. She cried when she found out they were going to edit her into some manipulative monster. Meanwhile, the guy playing America's sweetheart was a raging narcissist who spent half the time hitting on production assistants. Ever wonder why reality show arguments always escalate perfectly for dramatic commercial breaks? Because that's take 3, baby. Story 12. Somewhere in a warehouse, there's probably still a box of expired meds with my fingerprints on it. The pharmacy I worked for had a little side hustle, buying up expired medication from disposal companies and reselling it at full price. Insurance covered it, patients took it, and nobody was the wiser. The only reason the company got caught is because they had to keep changing names every time an insurance provider got too many complaints. At one point, we were shuffling customers between 3 different pharmacies that were literally the same company with different logos. When they finally got shut down, it wasn't because of ethics. It was because they couldn't figure out how to operate legally without losing money. Story 13. If you've ever gotten a mortgage through Chase, I'm sorry. Their system is straight up ancient. I'm talking DOS-based, early 2000s tech that barely functions, and they paid hundreds of millions for it. The best part? They sabotage their own salespeople to avoid paying commissions. If you start making too much, they'll randomly give you bad leads or stick you on a pointless project to tank your numbers. And if you somehow still beat the system, they'll dig through your work chats and personal files until they find a reason to fire you. Oh, and those diversity promotions they brag about? Mostly a numbers game. They'll open inclusion-only positions for low-level management jobs that are already planned to be cut. But hey, they get to pat themselves on the back for the statistics. Story 14. Amazon trains its employees to lie. I mean, all companies have PR strategies, but this was next level. In associate training, they straight up told us how to dodge certain questions from customers. One part of our contract even had a social clause that basically discouraged bad-mouthing Amazon, even in private conversations. The kicker? They really don't want you discussing warehouse conditions. If someone asked about it, we were supposed to smile and say, "Amazon provides a safe and productive work environment." Meanwhile, I had coworkers passing out from exhaustion, peeing in bottles to meet quotas, and crying in the break room. But yeah, totally safe and productive. Story 15. Once upon a time, I saw the financial crash coming, 6 months before it happened. I was at an investment conference when I overheard some heavy hitters talking about how bad things really were. One guy sighed and said, "What do we do? Go out there and tell them we're all fucked?" They laughed, then walked on stage and told everyone the market was strong. I had no idea what a tranche was before that day, but after listening to those guys talk, I realized 2 things. 1, this was about to get really bad. 2, they did not care. They had already moved their money. The rest of us? We were screwed. Story 16. Signing a DocuSign document on your phone was basically handing over your personal data on a silver platter. We took everything we could: device info, location, usage patterns. The mobile app was the real jackpot. People bought houses on that thing, completely unaware that we were scooping up every scrap of information along the way. Someone once asked if using it on a computer was safer, and the honest answer? Slightly. But if you ever used the app, congrats, you probably gave us more data than you gave your own mother. Story 17. There's a chance your made-in-the-USA military gear wasn't even made in the same hemisphere. The company I worked for had an entire department dedicated to cutting out made-in-China tags and sewing in made-in-USA labels before shipping orders off to the government. It wasn't even subtle. Some days we had literal piles of discarded tags on the floor. I once joked that we should keep a few and mail them back to the Pentagon as a souvenir. My manager did not find it funny. Story 18. One time, I accidentally helped a flood disaster happen. Well, not exactly, but I tried to warn people and got ignored. I worked for a government weather agency, and I saw data that pointed to a major flood risk that the flood forecasters completely overlooked. My supervisor called them into a meeting. I broke it down for them, and they were so clueless they didn't even know which watershed I was talking about. I had to make a custom map, like I was explaining a board game to a toddler. When they finally got it, they got real quiet, walked out, and 2 days later, boom, emergency flood forecast. It ended up costing taxpayers $500 million, and when the official flood review came out, they just blamed bad data and lack of staff. They never even acknowledged I was the one who saw it first. Story 19. Medicare calls are an absolute scam. And I don't just mean annoying, I mean evil. I worked for a company in downtown Chicago where we were trained to trick elderly people into switching their plans. Most of them had no idea what was happening. I once took a guy off his plan without realizing his new one would make one of his medications cost thousands instead of $20. When I finally saw his med list, I spent 2 hours undoing the change. But for every one person I saved, who knows how many got screwed over. The worst part? Some of my co-workers knew exactly what they were doing and didn't care. If your parents or grandparents ever get a Medicare call, hang up. Immediately. Story 20. That family recipe at your favorite restaurant. Yeah, it might just be stolen. The owner of the place I worked at built the whole business using books he found in the house of a deceased dementia patient he used to care for. The entire menu, the branding, even the mascot, straight from those books. The best part? The whole thing was marketed as being based on our grandmother's old recipes. Technically true, just not their grandmother. But hey, the food was good and business was booming, so who was I to judge? Story 21. Somewhere out there, a guy is still convinced he won a fair fight against the Supercell matchmaking system. He didn't. I used to work there, and let's just say spending money made the game way more fun. If you bought gems, suddenly your matchups got a little easier, your opponents a little dumber. But if you didn't spend? Oh, you were in for a bad time. We weren't allowed to talk about it, but the algorithm absolutely encouraged players to pay up. I had friends who swore their skills magically improved after buying a few upgrades. Nah, man. The game just stopped screwing you over for a little while. Story 22. The chocolate cake at Portillo's? Yeah, the secret ingredient is mayonnaise. We weren't allowed to tell customers, but I swear if anyone saw how much mayo went into it, they'd drop their fork. I told a friend once, and he refused to eat another slice, until I reminded him he'd been inhaling it for years with 0 complaints. But it's mayonnaise, he said, like I had just told him the frosting was made of motor oil. Buddy, you've been loving mayo cake this whole time. Just accept it. Story 23. I saw so many Walking Dead characters die before they were supposed to. They made us sign NDAs every single day, but the leaks still happened. Because the crew talked. One time, a background actor overheard the main cast rehearsing a major death scene and immediately went outside to call their friend. We all just stood there staring like, "Did you seriously just do that in front of us?" Meanwhile, fans were trying to bribe us for spoilers, offering everything from cash to concert tickets. If they had just asked nicely, I probably would have spilled for free. Story 24. The state's IT department was running on pure duct tape and denial. I worked there for a bit, and let me tell you, those government systems were beyond vulnerable. In the Capitol building, the servers were literally old desktop computers stacked on paint cans in a basement that flooded regularly. I once asked why they hadn't at least moved them to higher ground, and my boss just shrugged and said, "If it ain't broke, don't fix it." Sir, it is broke. It is so broke. Story 25. That luxury car you think has amazing ratings. Yeah, those reviews were manipulated. We were trained to dissuade negative ones using tactics that were borderline psychological warfare. If a customer was pissed, I'd act like I was on their side and tell them a bad review would only hurt the low-level employee who really fought for them. Then I'd offer some free car mats or a free oil change. Boom. 5 stars. Oh, and those free services? Half the time, they were just excuses to fix secret recalls without actually calling it a recall. I still cringe when I see people brag about picking a car based on customer ratings. Story 26. FedEx packages have more than just tracking numbers on them. Sometimes they've got a little bit of urine, too. Drivers are under so much pressure to make deliveries on time that a lot of them don't stop for bathroom breaks. The solution? Pee bottles. And let me tell you, those things do not always stay sealed. I had a coworker who knocked one over in the back of the truck, and the splash zone was tragic. We're talking packages, letters, someone's engagement ring, just marinating in trucker lemonade. And before you ask, no, there's no urine exposure checkbox in the FedEx tracking system. Story 27. Hospitals don't care if they cut you open for no reason. I saw it happen when I was interning. A woman came in for a checkup, 6 months pregnant, feeling depressed. The doctors thought they saw a tumor on her scan, so they rushed her into surgery. After cracking open her skull, they realized, whoops, no tumor. But did they tell her that? Absolutely not. They just closed her up and acted like they successfully removed it. To this day, she probably thinks she dodged a bullet, but really, they just gave her a free haircut and a massive hospital bill. Story 28. Amazon doesn't just discourage employees from complaining, they train them to lie. When I worked there, they straight up taught us how to dodge customer questions. If someone asked about warehouse conditions, we had a script. Amazon provides a safe and productive work environment. Meanwhile, I had coworkers crying in the break room and passing out from exhaustion. The best part? They had a whole social contract that strongly suggested we shouldn't badmouth the company even in private conversations. Like, sorry, Jeff, but if I want to complain about my job to my mom, I'm going to do it. Story 29. Your mortgage rate wasn't determined by some fancy algorithm. It was determined by whether or not I was in a good mood. I worked in finance, and I cannot stress this enough. It was all vibes. If you caught me after my morning coffee and threw in a compliment about my tie, congrats, you got a better rate. If I was hungry? Bad news, buddy. I once gave someone the lowest rate possible just because they made me laugh. People think loan rates are based on deep financial calculations. Nah. Sometimes it's just a coin flip and a Snickers bar away from disaster. Story 30. That video game that was terrible on release? It was always terrible. It was terrible in beta, terrible in alpha, terrible when the first line of code was written. But we weren't allowed to say anything. I tested games, and half the time we'd report a major bug, and the response from higher-ups would be, yeah, we're shipping it anyway. Then launch day would roll around, the game would be a broken mess, and the internet would explode like it was some huge surprise. Buddy, we knew. We tried. but they made us sign NDAs so we couldn't warn you. So next time a game launches in a horrible state, just know there's probably a whole team of testers screaming, "We told you so," into the void. Story 31. Corporate cannabis is just Walmart with weed. Everyone thinks these big dispensaries are run by chill stoners who love the plant. But nah. It's frat bros in designer suits who don't care what they're selling as long as the cash flows. I worked at a grow operation, and the owners were driving luxury cars while the employees were making barely above minimum wage. The second my buddy finished installing an expensive irrigation system, they fired him. Thanks for the free labor. Don't let the door hit you. Also, those fancy strain names, most of them are just random plants thrown together. If you think you're getting some carefully curated lab-tested bud, you're adorable. Story 32. Medicare Advantage calls are a nightmare, and I know because I used to make them. My whole job was convincing elderly folks to upgrade their plans, which really meant screwing them over. We had people with Alzheimer's unknowingly agreeing to drop their coverage, and when their families called in furious, our managers just shrugged. One day I switched a guy's plan, only to find out later that his $20 medication would cost thousands under his new one. I panicked, called him back, and spent 2 hours reversing it. That was the day I realized I couldn't do it anymore. If your grandparents ever get one of those calls, do them a favor, hang up. Story 33. Non-profits are just for-profits in disguise. I worked for one, and let me tell you, donations almost never go where you think they do. When people donate, they imagine their money helping people directly, buying meals, funding shelters. In reality, it mostly goes to operating costs, which is a fancy way of saying executive salaries and keeping the lights on. The CEO of my organization made 6 figures while we struggled to actually fund programs. The kicker? If someone donated but designated the money for a specific cause, leadership got annoyed because it meant they couldn't use it for whatever they wanted. It's not a charity, it's a business with a really good marketing team. Story 34. That luxury car brand you love? The one with the amazing reviews? Yeah, those are completely manipulated. We were trained to turn pissed-off customers into 5-star reviews using a method that should honestly be considered psychological warfare. If someone was mad, we'd pull them aside and say, "Look, I believe you, but a bad review won't hurt the company. It'll hurt the employee who's been fighting for you." Then we'd offer free mats, a free oil change, or something cheap but effective. Almost every time they'd cave. Meanwhile, corporate would call it organic customer satisfaction. Sure, buddy. Super organic. Story 35. Big banks knew the 2008 crash was coming months before it happened. I was at an investment conference where the top guys were talking about it like a bad storm on the horizon. One of them sighed and said, "What do we do? Go out there and tell them we're all fucked?" Then they laughed, went on stage, and reassured investors that everything was fine. I had never even heard the word tranche before that day. But I left that conference knowing 2 things. 1, this was about to get really bad. And 2, the people who caused it were going to be just fine.